Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dimwits, Dipshots, Doofuses, and Dullards. Now, I don't use the word dip shot lightly, and really I only say that because in the first 2 minutes of a YouTube video, they don't want you to swear, so that's why that corniness is like that. But I will swear after the 2 minute mark, so don't worry. Or potentially swear anyway. But anyway, this is the show where we indeed look at some morons, or whatever you want to call them, people of low intelligence and ill repute. And the quadruple D of the week for this week is Donald Trump, the expansionist clown. So, why am I calling him an expansionist? Maybe you live under a rock, maybe you haven't heard, but President elect Donald Trump has expressed a strong interest in expanding U.S. control over Greenland and the Panama Canal, even suggesting the possibility of using military force to achieve these objectives. And you can find all sorts of news sources talking about this. And it makes a person immediately wonder, well, where did Donald Trump the peacemaker go? I thought he wasn't going to initiate any new wars or anything like that. Why is he suddenly engaging in this manifest density talk? And I say manifest density because you'd have to be pretty dense to actually think all of this is a good idea, to alienate allies and all that, and just to create new enemies basically out of the blue. But to be fair, I do want to sort of look at this somewhat objectively and examine the issue of what would be a possible strategic significance to this attempt to move into Greenland. And, well, some people are saying, oh, that's just Donald Trump trolling people. Well, guess what? Guess what? Here's a fun little detail. People didn't just vote for him to be a sort of internet troll, you morons. He's supposed to be a president, not an internet troll. I guess some people didn't get that memo that that's what the election was for. We weren't voting for the internet troll in chief, we were voting for the president, you know, the commander in chief, not an internet troll. So, you might want to get your priorities in check when you show up at the ballot box instead of turning it into the idiot box. So, anyway, I'm going to look at that right now. What was the possible motivation for him to start talking about this crap? So, Greenland, the world's largest island, or so I've read, is situated northeast of Canada and is predominantly covered by ice, despite the name of Greenland. It operates as a semi autonomous territory under the Kingdom of Denmark, with a population of approximately 60,000 residents. Its strategic location between North America, Europe, and Russia enhances its importance for both economic and defense purposes, or so the argument goes. The accelerating Arctic ice melt is opening new shipping routes, or routes, however you want. Routes or routes, I've heard it pronounced both ways. But anyway, shipping routes such as the Northern Sea Route, which significantly reduces travel time between East Asia and Europe. So I guess that's it. So basically, as other people have noted, because the climate is changing and the Arctic ice is melting, now we have more reason to get in there and maybe get at some resources and dominate the territory, the sea route. So Greenland is also rich in natural resources, including rare earth elements, oil and gas. So there's a greedy component to it. These resources are increasingly coveted as global demand for technology and renewable energy components rises. The United States has a long-standing military presence in Greenland, notably at Thule Air Base, the US's northernmost military installation, which is said to play a crucial role in missile defense and space surveillance. So we already do have a presence there. So it kind of seems like, you know, maybe this is just naked greed, and I wonder who is actually handing Donald Trump these talking points, because despite his image, he's not in control. He gets marching orders from the oligarchs who are actually giving him money. He is a president for hire. He is not he's not a tough guy like he tries to make himself look. He's actually being whipped by capitalist pigs, so to speak. So Trump's interest in Greenland is not unprecedented, and that should be noted. And I think the news outlets aren't doing enough to like get into the historical details. So, for example, the U.S. has previously attempted to purchase the island, recognizing its strategic value. Of course, purchasing would be different from having sort of a military invasion there. In 1946, from what I understand, the Truman administration offered $100 million in gold for Greenland, but Denmark declined the offer. And Trump's renewed interest underscores concerns about China's and Russia's expanding activities in the Arctic region. So it's almost like keeping up with the Johnsons, to use a silly expression. It's like if they can do it, I can too. And that just reveals the naked power ambitions on display here. China has declared itself a near Arctic state and has invested in Arctic infrastructure, while Russia has been remilitarizing its Arctic territories. So it's not like there is no reason here, um, but you you get a real question of, well, are we really any better than them, or do we just happen to be? I don't even know if we're the biggest dogs in the, I don't know, the dog yard at this point, in the junkyard, whatever you want to, whatever expression you want to use. Because China is actually starting to surpass us in plenty of ways. And of course, Russia is also sort of dominating the United States and certainly dominating Trump. Putin has Donald Trump pretty much whipped, as you can easily see. There are definitely some clips out there where he's basically humiliating Trump in those public relations meetings. But anyway, what is my perspective on U.S. expansionism here? So, in case you haven't understood by now, I'm definitely on the critical side of it, to say the least. From my standpoint, state driven expansionism and militarism are to be viewed critically. I generally oppose hierarchical structures and coercive state actions, advocating for decentralized voluntary associations instead. That is, I guess, a utopian ideal, but in light of these recent events, they just seem practical to me. The pursuit of territories like Greenland and strategic assets such as the Panama Canal exemplifies the imperialistic tendencies of nation states, driven by economic interests and power consolidation. These are basically outdated ideas, but leave it up to us to always be behind the times and to rarely be innovative. The militarization of regions like the Arctic raises concerns about environmental degradation, which, of course, none of these powerful leaders will care about, but which the populations will certainly have to face. And, of course, you have the marginalization of indigenous populations as well. Greenland's Inuit community, for instance, has historically faced challenges due to colonialism and external exploitation of their land. But, somebody like Trump or Putin, they don't give a rat's ass about that. They'll just move on in and do what they want if they can get away with it. So I advocate for the self determination of such communities, free from external state interference to the extent possible. And, you know, some people are against that. Furthermore, the emphasis on controlling strategic locations for military advantage perpetuates global power imbalances and conflicts. And, that's one of the chief aims. The background fact here is that whenever there is a conflict, somebody's making money off of it. And that somebody is probably going to be whoever is involved in the military industrial complex. Somebody is drawing a little bit of, well, not just a little bit, but a lot of money out of this. So I argue for the dismantling of military industrial complexes and the promotion of peaceful, cooperative international relations, which would be possible if we didn't keep electing these morons. And, if they were better kept in check, the focus on securing resources and trade routes through potential military means reflects a capitalist drive for profit at the expense of human and ecological well being. So, nothing new there. That's just been how they've conducted business. They are always looking backwards, never looking forwards. And what they say, if you keep on doing the same thing over and over again, it's perfectly sane. No, they actually say, if you keep on doing the same thing and getting bad results, it's the definition of insanity. But we're traditionalists here, I suppose. So Trump's ambitions regarding Greenland and the Panama Canal highlight the strategic importance of these regions in contemporary geopolitics, but it also is evidence that he's getting marching orders from someone because he's probably too stupid to think of these things on his own. And from my perspective, such pursuits are emblematic of state centric power dynamics and capitalist exploitation, advocating for the autonomy of local populations and the demilitarization of international relations aligns with my principles of decentralization, voluntary cooperation, and opposition to imperialism. Imagine that. So, if you want to read more about these developments, the Wall Street Journal has an article called What Trump Wants with Greenland. The New York Post, which is sort of a rotten publication. But anyway, they have something titled Why Does Donald Trump Want Greenland? Behind the strong, deliberate message to China. Strong, deliberate from a certain point of view, I would say weak and desperate to cling to power and relevance from a different point of view. And Reuters has an article titled Trump Previews Combative Foreign Policy with Threats to Panama and Greenland. So, of course, the combative foreign policy thing kind of clashes with the idea that he'll be a peacemaker, you know? So, I do have another segment here on this series, which is a show within a show on, let's see, the peripheral poophead of the week. That's my second segment, and this time it's sort of a unique pick. I'm picking Neil McGill Gorsuch, and it's it's sort of unconventional because he's probably not the worst of the worst, but I'm going to pick on him a little bit for his constitutional originalist nonsense. And so, just to let you know the biographical details, Neil Gorsuch was born on August 29th, 1967, in Denver, Colorado. He's been serving as an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court since April 10th, 2017, following his nomination by President Orange Dufus on January 31st, 2017. And Gorsuch's academic journey began at Columbia University, where he earned his undergraduate degree and distinguished himself as a writer. And He then pursued legal studies at Harvard Law School and later obtained a doctorate in jurisprudence from Oxford University and 2004 as a Marshall Scholar. His doctoral thesis, supervised by legal philosopher John Finnis, explored the morality of assisted suicide, and apparently he is against that, from what I understand. So early in his legal career, Gorsuch clerked for Judge David B. Sentell and Supreme Court Justices Byron White and Anthony Kennedy. He practiced law with the firm Kellogg, Hanson, Todd, Feigl, and Frederick from 1995 to 2005. Subsequently, he served as Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General, where they have some long titles, don't they? At the U.S. Department of Justice until his appointment to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in 2006 by President George W. Bush. And Gorsuch is known for his textualist approach to statutory interpretation and originalist perspective on the U.S. Constitution. That means he emphasizes interpreting legal texts based on their original public meaning, aligning with the principles of natural law jurisprudence alongside Harlan Crow's sweet, sweet buddy, Justice Clarence Thomas. So, basically, what this means is that if you if you get a case, you're supposed to try to view it through the long dead eyes of the founding fathers, because somehow that makes sense in the modern era to try to see things the way that they saw it. And you know, there's nothing particularly intelligent about that idea. I'm sorry to say. You know, I don't want to come at this from a totally dismissive perspective, but what actual wisdom is there in saying I'm going to look at this solely through the eyes of somebody who was alive like hundreds and hundreds of years ago? That is a little bit, I don't know, it borders on batshit crazy, to be honest. And as some of you probably know, the founding fathers, you know, and the people who crafted the Constitution were not perfect. They owned slaves and stuff like that. And in fact, here's one of the biggest ironies here. They actually made it so that the US Constitution would be, and the law of the land would be a changing document over time. You know, a living document is a term that has been used. So even they understood that, you know, you're not supposed to keep things literally the same as society progresses. So even the founding fathers, as horrible as they sometimes could be, like Thomas Jefferson, uh, I mean, I don't want to get too much into this, but he, I mean, how do I say this? He got with his, he bas- he basically forced his teenage slave into carrying a child. That's like the most YouTube friendly way I think I could phrase that to where I wouldn't immediately be demonetized. So, but even he, in his wisdom, and oddly enough, I don't even use that word that loosely because even though he was a terrible person, he was actually in some ways wise. That's how complex history can be. But even though he was terrible, he was actually one of the people who, you know, saw the dangers of having a society that always stayed the same and that didn't change with the times and whatnot. So, oddly enough, even a backwards thinking person uh, from hundreds of years ago is ironically more, you know, in tune with the times than these idiots sitting on the Supreme Court, or some of these idiots anyway. You know, like a lot of these people are like religious fanatics too. Uh, well, I shouldn't say a lot of these people. There's only a couple of them there anyway. But you know, like Some of them are religious fanatics, even though, of course, the United States is a secular government and has been for a long time. Going back to Thomas Jefferson, I have to yet again use his example because he well, what's the right word for this? He disestablished the Anglican Church in Virginia, and you might want to look into that. So he firmly believed in not having an official church. Um, so yeah, that's kind of relevant when we talk about these originalist claims. So here are some of the the significant cases that Gorsuch has been involved with during his Supreme Court tenure. There was Bostock versus Clayton County. It was a landmark 2020 decision which extended uh, part of the Civil Rights Act to prohibit employment discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So that might not have been such a bad decision. Um, but he was somebody who apparently authored the majority opinion on that. So I wouldn't say he was always wrong in his decisions, right? Um, there was also the McGirt versus Oklahoma case. Also in 2020, the court ruled that a large portion of eastern Oklahoma remains Native American land for certain legal purposes, upholding treaty obligations. So what the heck's going on here? He's actually made a few good decisions. So why am I criticizing him so hard? Well, it still gets back to the conflict with the uh, claims of originalism versus modernism. Then there's Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. The 2022 decision supported a public school coach's right to pray on the field after games, emphasizing individual religious expression, or that's what they say. But the problem with that is a public school official, um, leading a prayer in a public school. I mean, could you imagine if it was like a Satanist uh, public school official leading a prayer, and he said, "Oh, you students could join me out on the football field. We're gonna pray to I don't know Satan." I mean, a lot of these same people would object pretty fervently to that, and of course, that decision probably does not align with the original intent of the U.S. Constitution in the first place. So, yeah, there's that. That's really one of my main gripes here. It's not that he's never made a good decision, but, at the end of the day, I think he's made, you know, poor choices of overarching philosophies that ostensibly guide his judgment. And another case is Ramos versus Louisiana. In 2020, the court held that the Sixth Amendment requires unanimous jury verdicts for serious offenses in state courts, overturning previous practices in Louisiana and Oregon. So, not necessarily, you know, uh, the most controversial cases being are the most controversial decisions. But, at the end of the day, I think a lot of his originalism is a double edged sword. His emphasis on limiting government overreach aligns with certain critiques of state power, but at the same time, he's part of a movement that is all about government overreach, like allowing a government official to lead, or not a government official, but a government employee to lead students in a prayer out on the football field. That is perhaps overstepping the bounds of what the government ought to be able to do. It's sort of officiating a religion. It's a way of perhaps alienating students who are not believers in that religion. And like I said, it probably is a violation of actual original intent behind the Constitution anyway. But these people, they can conveniently just overlook that and pretend they're originalists, no matter what the decision actually is. So that's why I'm going after him. It's not the most obvious critique to make, but I'm going to make it anyway. That's the nature of this show that I have here. So, all right. So, I've got a third segment here, the fetid fever dream flashback of the week. And for that, we're going to look at Donald Trump again. And the biggest scandal involving Trump is subjective, as it depends on one's perspective, values, and political framework. However, many consider the January 6th Capitol insurrection and his role in allegedly inciting it to be among the most significant scandals. I sure would say that's one of the biggest ones. This event involved an attack on the U.S. Capitol that many of us witnessed live on television by Trump supporters attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election results after Trump persistently promoted claims of election fraud without evidence. His actions, including a speech just before the attack and his subsequent delay in condemning the violence, or actually putting a stop to it right away, led to his second impeachment, making him the only U.S. president to be impeached twice. And hey, he survived that politically, and I guess you got to give credit where it's due, because a lot of dumbasses out there were like, "Hey, let's put this obvious, criminal in power again." So there are other contenders for Trump's biggest scandal. They include the Stormy Daniels affair and hush money payments, for which some people actually went to prison. But some people say, "Oh, there were no crimes committed." Well, there were people even before Donald Trump who got into trouble over that one in the courtrooms. There was also, alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election and alleged collusion, mishandling classified documents after leaving office. Well, mishandling is kind of putting it lightly. He stole them and stockpiled them in a very cartoonish way in his, I guess, home office in Mar-a-Lago. And it seems like just about anybody could have went in there and had access to him. There was also obstruction of justice outlined in the Mueller report, and use of presidential powers to enrich his businesses and family. That would be emoluments clause controversies and likely violations. So, yeah, quite a rap sheet. I haven't even touched upon everything. Um, I know there were some times where he actually urged voters to try voting twice, which is probably a violation of the law. And people rarely ever mention those instances. But I'm pretty sure those could count as crimes as well. In a saner world, that would be, something people would talk about a little bit more. But anyway, what's my perspective on the January 6th scandal, which I've talked about quite a bit on my blogs and even on this podcast in the past? So, my critique of Trump and the scandals surrounding him focuses, especially these days, largely on the broader systemic issues revealed rather than viewing them as isolated incidents or uniquely tied to any one individual, including the Orange Menace himself. So, I would say that they're evidence of the state as a mechanism of power and coercion. A thorough perspective might highlight that Trump's actions exemplify how state power concentrates in individuals and institutions, leading to abuse and corruption, perhaps as an inevitability. You know, I think certain individuals are more likely to be criminal or otherwise disreputable than others, but at the end of the day, power sort of invites people to act in corrupt, if not depraved, manner. So we also have Trump's ability to mobilize a mass of followers to challenge democratic processes, which underscores how hierarchical systems enable demagogues to exploit societal divisions. You also have what could be called the illusion of democracy. I often critique liberal democracies for being oligarchic in nature, where power is controlled by elites despite appearances of public participation. Well, I mean, I guess they're not just appearances, but at the end of the day, in our system, the voter only counts so much, especially with the electoral college largely calling the shots. So, from this view, the Capitol riot and Trump's influence on his supporters reflect the alienation and disillusion many feel toward the political system, a frustration I see as valid in some respects, but misdirected in this case towards sustaining state power, aka Trump's presidency, rather than weakening or perhaps even dismantling it. So, in other words, it was not even real rebellion against unjust power, but an attempt to impose an even more unjust power on the population and really just fundamentally uh, poop in the face of democracy itself. And there's also complicity of the system, not just individuals. Rather than framing Trump as an aberration, I would argue he is a product of systemic flaws, those being capitalism, nationalism, and the cult of leadership. For example, his scandals often involve leveraging power for personal or corporate gain, behaviors that should be seen as endemic to a capitalist state. And of course, you also have the use of violence, good old violence. So the January 6th riot could be viewed as a symptom of state sanctioned and socially normalized violence. Trump's rhetoric may have incited the mob, but I might emphasize that the state frequently employs violence to preserve its order, making distinctions between legitimate and illegitimate violence appear rather arbitrary. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the people in the crowd might not have even understood what they're doing is wrong, because, of course, violence is a normal enough thing society wide. So, polarization is also a feature of the state. I critique how the state and its media structures create division among people. Trump scandals fuel partisan divides, but I would argue that both major parties contribute to systemic inequality, militarism, and ecological harm, issues far more pressing than political theater. While Trump is certainly worse, the two parties are too similar for many average voters to realize it. That's why the 2024 election was, you know, close, even according to the polls. And of course, the male chauvinists pulled ahead. Plus, the far right media has successfully controlled the narrative and made Trump appear to be more of an underdog than he ever was. And the Democratic Party abysmally fails as, you know, a sort of counterbalance. It just fails at a lot of its messaging, in addition to perpetuating policies that alienate progressives and depressing their own turnout, such as support for the genocide of people in Gaza. So, yep. So, from my perspective, the scandals involving Trump highlight deeper systemic problems tied to hierarchical authority, capitalism, and the state itself. Rather than being seen as an outlier or a singularly corrupt individual, Trump is emblematic of the failings of a system that prioritizes power and wealth over collective liberation and equity. I would advocate not for mere reform within such a system, though even those reforms can have some value, but for its dismantling in favor of decentralized, non hierarchical structures that empower communities to self govern. So, yep, quite a mouthful of words. And maybe I'll do a next uh, episode that will deal with more of these themes on this show within a show. So I hope you enjoyed the present episode of Dimwits, Dipshits, Doofuses, and Dullards. And I will have another installment, probably next week sometime. Hopefully, you will show up and listen to it. And feel free to click like and subscribe on YouTube and all that jazz. I'm sure you already knew that, though. So, have a good one.